Hello, everybody. It's me, Amy, not Nikki, ready to intro the IBS Freedom Podcast. I'm so pumped. Today we have a guest who I've been following for a while, and I know Nikki's been following for a while. Dave Mayo's here from his old site was Hack Your Gut, but he has moved to Substack. And let me give the official intro, though. Dave has worked in the health and wellness industry for over 25 years, helping people improve their health and well-being through online programs, one-on-one sessions, and corporate wellness programs. For the last 13 years, he has had a focus on gut health and circadian rhythms, working with functional medicine clinics to develop materials, as well as individuals looking to optimize their gut health. He also shares online content through YouTube and Substack to help break down complex research on gut health to the lay public. You can find him at his Hack Your Gut YouTube channel or Substack at davemayo.substack.com. Dave, thank you so much for being here. I'm pumped just because you've been kind of around in this world with us for a while, and I feel like we share very similar philosophies on gut health, which is unique because I feel like there's not so many of us who kind of share the same
It's a small
philosophy.
community that doesn't want to obliterate the gut and starve everything in the gut 24/7.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's growing.
True.
The community is growing, thank God.
Oh, for sure. It was very small several years ago. So yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to kind of tossing out some information, hopefully to help some people out and make them feel better.
Yeah. Well, and I really loved your Hack Your Gut site, now Substack. I think you have a really unique ability to take pretty complex research and pull out a lot of pearls and like lifestyle tips. And I think that that's so awesome for people that are listening to this podcast to go find you on Substack and YouTube, and to kind of look at a lot of the evidence-based stuff that you're exhibiting on those sites. That's laughing
not my tail, by the way.
Yes, we're laughing at
Kiki's
the tail.
Well, now I think you have to scoop up Kiki and show the good people here on video.
She's great. I'm not a cat person, but I also don't want a dog because they require a lot more work. So my son got this cat. I call her Kiki. Her name is Pebbles. She's cute.
She's perfect.
She likes tummy rubs, which is weird. I think she might be a dog at heart. Because my kids, I have a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old. My 3-year-old hangs all over her, and she's just chill. So,
oh, that's like the perfect cat then.
Yeah, it is. I guess she gets the house vibe, so that's always good.
Yes, love it.
Now back to whatever poor Amy was saying, but I got distracted. I am a cat person, so I got very excited when I saw that tail again.
Yes, but yeah, I think in terms of where people are getting kind of their information. We were talking before hopping on that like being able to have people that you trust that provide decent information is hard to come by in this space. And I think that you are one of those people that I'm like, I'll refer people to some of your articles and be like, oh, check this out. This will help you think about things in a different way. And with AI and ChatGPT and all these things sort of coming out and people are using, I think they're getting a lot of weird information.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. I know we were talking about it before we hopped on.
Yeah. So, kind of on the online scene, I've been around for a while. I was mostly working with clients one-on-one, primarily in health and wellness, specifically diet, exercise, circadian rhythms, how to live a healthy lifestyle. You want to live a long time, you want to try to either limit, avoid, or kind of compress that window of chronic disease. And the problem is the information that you're exposed to isn't necessarily correct information. It's the information that is most attractive. So, for example, way back when, dating myself, probably 20 years ago, you had Dr. Oz promoting raspberry ketones for weight loss. And, there's supplement stores making tons and tons of money. And at the end of the day, those things don't really do anything other than, basically enrich whoever sells them, makes supplement stores, very popular, gets a lot of people to go in there. But unfortunately, for the person receiving the information, they see this on the one hand, I can diet, I can exercise, I can work on all these things, or I could just take this supplement and not have to worry about any of it. And it doesn't work that way. And so, you kind of have silos of what I don't like the term misinformation. It's just kind of misused a lot now, but just bad information. So, particularly in gut health and weight loss, you have the diet tribes. And the problem with the diet tribes is basically evidence doesn't penetrate the individual who is part of a diet tribe. So if you're a keto guy, if you're a vegan guy, if you're a carnivore guy, evidence that's counter to what you believe doesn't really penetrate because, for one, it doesn't really get discussed. When that evidence is provided to you, it's always provided to you with oh yeah, but they didn't do this, this, or this. And so what you have is just kind of this cloud of there was a documentary a while back on Netflix. If I'm blanking on the name, it'll come. Merchants of Doubt is what it was, I believe was. And what it is they're not selling you on something. They're selling you that the evidence for these other things is not perfect. Therefore, they have to be wrong. And I have the true information. And kind of part of that documentary was focused primarily on the cigarette companies, the tobacco companies, and how they weren't really telling you that cigarette smoking was good for you. They were saying these studies are flawed, so you really should ignore them. You know, their goal there was just to prolong the time during which they could effectively give people something that was making them less healthy and ultimately leading to an earlier death. Now, kind of segue through to now, and now we have AI, and AI with this kind of, I don't even want to say diatribe, tribal stuff is really bad because AI is going to respond to a question based off of how you ask that question. And a lot of the times, the conversational elements of that are going to play a very, very big role. So for example, today, I know the answer to this because I'm very familiar with the literature. First question I asked Copilot, I believe it was, is I said, should women train based on their cycle? Answer, yes, provides a whole lot of information. My second question was, does the evidence support that a woman should train for the cycle? And the answer is no. And the reason behind that is your cycle is kind of an off-target thing. Some women, and in general, you may see women as a whole may have specific days where they feel worse, typically during their cycle. However, cycle's not the target. Do you feel good or do you feel bad? That's a question you have to ask yourself. If you feel bad, don't train hard. It doesn't matter where that is in your cycle. But what you get are these people that say you should train based on your cycle. And, you know, that gets you to think, hey, that sounds like I'm part of this group. Another thing that's getting crazy attention is kind of the perimenopause and the postmenopause, and the stuff I see on that is just crazy ridiculous. Very similar things. Women are going through a set of challenges when they go through perimenopause and postmenopause, but generally speaking, training wise, there aren't a hard set of rules that you need to follow. There are certainly changes that come. The hormonal changes definitely affect very many things other than your fertility, basically immune function, gut health for sure, how you feel from day to day, hot flashes and all those things. But the thing is, the hook is to get you emotionally attached to this group, so then you're just kind of going to ignore any rational discussion about the topics within this group. And then the people who run those groups will basically be like, oh, you know, don't listen to that. They're just kind of, you know, part of the anti-group. And so it's just very, very tough for people to get good information. And, you know, I'm trying to help people kind of get better information. And then a lot of that stuff that you see, the stuff that gets engagement, the people who are around are selling a lot of stuff. They're selling a lot of supplements. They're selling a lot of programs. Their programs become popular. They become more popular. And it's just this self-feeding machine that brings all of this information that isn't necessarily good in front of a lot of people's eyes.
Yeah, you know, I feel like this has been hard for a long time, even before the advent of AI and the popularity of AI. But I've been telling people in my programs for years that you have to be careful getting information just on the internet. Because it's like what you said, the vegan people are not going to be super open-minded to research that conflicts with their vegan worldview, and the carnivore people aren't generally going to be open-minded to things that conflict with that worldview. And it gets really messy, especially when these influencers make their living and build their identity around whatever the diet is. Right? Like, oh, you have a vegan YouTube channel and you wrote a vegan cookbook and you appear at vegan expos and, you know, you're raising your baby to be vegan and whatever else. And I have to say too, like kind of tangentially related to this, but we've now had the honor of having Sarah Ballantyne, formerly known as the Paleo Mom, on this podcast twice. I don't know if you followed her stuff in recent years, but holy crap, I give her a lot of credit because she's an example of somebody who was really, really, really entrenched in that paleo AIP restrictive dieting world. Grains are evil, grains are inflammatory, all of that. And she pulled out and did a complete 180. And she told us that she's reintroduced every single food except for gluten now at this point. And she has a very diverse diet. And now she's preaching this like new nutritional philosophy that she calls Nutrivore. But that's very rare. You don't see people, again, who are making their money and doing New York Times bestselling books on the topic. Like you don't see people do a 180 like that very often because there's just so much, like ego and identity work, and there's like the money piece of it. But now you layer this with, now we have AI, which is, I think at times like a glorified Google search. So like, I think, in this space in particular, you could ask AI, hey, ChatGPT, I just got diagnosed with SIBO. What is the best SIBO treatment? And it's just going to pull whatever is popular on the internet. But if you think of how people in the general internet recommend treating SIBO, it's not what any of us agree with, right? Like, you have to starve the SIBO with horrible, restrictive, malnourishing diets that have zero evidence supporting their use in SIBO, or zero evidence showing that they actually treat SIBO. But you have to do those diets, and you have to kill it and nuke it with all of the antibiotics and the antimicrobials on planet Earth. And you have to do breath testing that is absolute garbage, and you have to retest after 2 weeks, and you have to do repeat testing. And it's something like ChatGPT is going to pull whatever it finds on the internet and whatever seems to be the dominant conversation or the dominant consensus on the internet. But the cool thing about the internet is it can be wrong, and it oftentimes is wrong. And so you get something that feels very certain, right? Like, wow, this bot that has access to all of the information on the internet is telling me with a great deal of certainty that this is the best SIBO treatment. Hell yes, this is going to be good. And I think people don't fully realize like the drawbacks of using something like this. And even like the way you frame the question, as you mentioned, is really, really important too. If you have a conversation with ChatGPT, like it's your buddy, you're going to get buddy level advice. And, maybe your buddy who just had 2 beers gives you good advice 20% of the time, but do you really want to take your medical care to your buddy who just had 2 beers?
Yeah. That's the problem. So that's the problem. It's all, what's the probability this is going to be right? And the way, ChatGPT and all those things work is it treats, you go to Google Scholar and you see something published in Cell, it treats that the same as Steve the janitor's blog. And those are not the same. Like, they're not even remotely the same. It can't really different. And even if you go to Google Scholar, it's, it might weigh certain types of evidence that really, 50% of the time they're not accurate. Great example, and this bugs me a lot. And I do want to go back to the paleo thing because that's actually where I kind of came from. So I definitely know Sarah Ballantyne and all of her work, and I am very happy that she kind of broke away from that. But the thing with going on to like Google Scholar is you've got to be able to know what evidence is right most of the time. For example, cell studies. Like, people who are deathly afraid of oxalates, 99% of the studies they're looking at are studies in a petri dish. Do you know what happens to a cell in a petri dish if you give it water? It explodes. But you wouldn't tell people not to drink water because they would explode, because it's absolutely ridiculous.
Excuse you. You don't know what advice I give people, Dave. I am drinking pure vodka right now, actually. Water is toxic, and you should be ashamed of yourself for recommending water. Gosh darn. That's it. We're ending the episode.
It's so crazy. And and that's the thing, again, going back to the diatribes. Okay, well, you shouldn't listen to epidemiological or observational studies. Well, they share observational studies that supports their perspective all the time. They are not consistent in their logic. They're not consistent in what they require. You need to show them an RCT showing them that they are wrong, but they don't need to show you anything because they just feel better. And newsflash, most of the time when you change something, you tend to feel better because psychologically you feel better. And that's going to play a big role. I'm sure you guys have seen the studies in IBS, the nocebo effect, the placebo effect. You give somebody, you tell them that's gluten and they have symptoms, but it's not gluten. And it's so like your frame of mind is really, really important. At least from my perspective, and I have worked with some pretty sick not sick as in disease, but don't feel very well people. And just, starting to kind of believe is very beneficial. I've never helped somebody who said this absolutely will not work, and then it has worked. Actually, that's a lie. One time, there was a girl that came to me with back pain. She was lifting a stage and hurt her back. She'd been to chiropractors and a bunch of other people, physical therapists. They couldn't help her back. I helped her with a foam rolling program and it went away. So sometimes that happens, but that's one person. I've worked with high hundreds and kind of dealt with thousands of people. And I can't think of another instance where somebody said, this is not going to work, and it worked. So, but kind of going back to the paleo thing, that's kind of where I got into the online diet stuff. I was never one of these people that is going to jump into something and this is all I believe. But with paleo, I kind of did. I didn't mind cutting out beans because I didn't particularly like them. I wasn't a fan of cutting out gluten. Didn't really care that much about dairy, but I kind of did it. I think it was around 2010, and I started to feel better. I lost weight, which is probably what made me feel better. I was, floating around 220. I got down to around 200. I remember it was 2010 when I started because I got married in April of 2011, and my wedding ring has not fit since that day. So, I went paleo, but then I just noticed it wasn't that restriction healed all these people. If that restriction wasn't enough, now all of a sudden it's carbs. So you have to cut out the carbs, like the paleo carbs. You got to get rid of those now. Well, if paleo fixed you, why are you cutting out carbs? And then now it's at carnivore, and it's just like all these people take these steps and they're healed. I can't. Jordan Peterson's daughter, who had the lion diet, that cured her, and then I guess apparently she never told anybody that her symptoms came back, and then now it's mold illness, which exists.
See, again, because her whole identity is this damn diet now, and she's making money. Yep. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, even if people figure out that their shitty diet or supplement or whatever it is doesn't work, 99% of the time, everybody but Sarah Ballantyne apparently is going to keep that shit under wraps. And you're never going to find out about it. They're going to keep promoting their crap.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like that saying goes, it's hard to convince a person that something is wrong when their livelihood depends on it being right. They're not going to change. Yeah. I mean, what's that dude, Paul Saladino? He still has some wacky ideas. It's not, and I said this before, eventually he's going to end up on an omnivorous diet, but the journey he's taken with all this contrarian BS is going to gather him all these people, and they're not going to realize, you could have been doing this 10 years ago. You could have been eating fruit 10 years ago. I think they're eating potatoes or rice. Basically, he's eating an omnivorous diet now. Why do you think that is? Clearly, carnivore didn't help him. In many respects, I'm kind of assuming he had some sort of a nutritional deficiency by going that way. And I agree, Sarah Ballantyne's great. I'm trying to remember. It's funny because I can't remember it was Gut Health that really kind of got me to realize that paleo wasn't really the way. I noticed the restrictions. I remember when I was doing...
Same thing for her, apparently.
Oh, for sure. And I was reading about humans can't digest gluten. And then all of a sudden there's all these microbes that can do it, and they're beneficial microbes. So do you really want them disappearing? What happens? A lot of people said they didn't really have a problem with gluten. They got rid of it, and now they can't really eat it. It's like you get rid of all these helpers that are helping you break this down. Same with oxalates.
I had the highest oxalate level I ever saw on an organic acids test, but I was never able to attribute symptoms directly to that. I never seemed to have a dietary oxalate intolerance issue. But what was happening, I think, is that I started doing yearly or bi-yearly organic acids tests on myself right after I got into paleo. Now, I was never strictly paleo. I would say I'm 90% paleo. So I would eat mostly paleo, but I would have rice if I went out for Thai food, or I would have like the rice or the corn tortillas if I went for Mexican food, that sort of thing. Well, I was eating almond flour, everything out the wazoo, right? Because almond flour was healthier. So I was making almond flour pancakes, almond flour muffins, almond flour cookies, almond flour breaded zucchini things that were supposed to be like fake mozzarella sticks.
I've eaten all of those things, by the way. My wife went heavy on the almond flour.
Everything was almond for a good period of my life. And this was also like towards the tail end of me healing my gut. And I thought that green smoothies were like the best thing imaginable. So I got myself a Vitamix, and I was doing big green smoothies with spinach almost every day. And I I was eliminating so many other foods that I was over relying on a handful of foods. And the foods that I was over relying on happened to be super high oxalate. And then lo and behold, the tail end of that kind of paleo-ish green smoothie era in my eating style, and I have super high oxalates. And then over the years, it did gradually go back down to a normal level after I stopped overusing and abusing these foods. But to be clear, I never cut out oxalates from my diet. I still to this day eat almonds and spinach. I just eat them like a normal human being. Like I'll put some spinach in a salad in the summer and I'll have, almonds, like a handful of almonds as a snack. I'm not going to make almond flour, almond butter, everything anymore. But I think it was simply just that I was over consuming almonds and spinach and it wasn't any more fun or sexy or interesting than that. So.
Yeah, it's just interesting too, because that's like when you look at the data, like best way to get a microbiome that breaks down oxalate is to consume oxalate. So you're probably an oxalate degrading machine over there.
Yeah.
I did that same thing. My wife would make, because in paleo, you're not really eating sweet treats. You're not, and then my wife is making the almond muffins, and I'm just housing like 50 of them, slathering them with almond butter, hammering down cashews. It's so it's. I look back at that and I'm just like, whoa, like what in the hell are you doing? And it's just, processed food is processed food. It's, I think people can eat a healthy diet and they have processed food, but I mean, that calorie wise was a humongous. Think about the number of calories in those muffins and they're so dense. It's just, that's the problem again with the tribalism in the diets. Is processed food is bad for you, so you should go paleo. Remember at the beginning of paleo, there wasn't really gluten-free bread, and then all of a sudden, all these people that were getting cured of their IBS by not eating gluten-free bread switched to that were from eating, gluten-free, suddenly started getting gluten-free breads, and their symptoms came back because it turns out a lot of people it's FODMAPs. There's all these off-target effects that it's just so useful to find exactly what's going on and fix it rather than just kind of let the internet decide what it is.
Well, and I'm going to take it the complete opposite direction even and say, you might not need to figure out what exactly is going on if you just stick to like basic fundamental principles of human health. Yeah. And so like, as this example, right? Like when a lot of people went paleo back in the day, we weren't eating what our Paleolithic ancestors were eating. No, our ancestors were not eating almond flour muffins slathered in almond butter that we got at Costco or whatever. And I'm not saying that that's intrinsically a bad thing to do every now and then, but I feel like the whole point of going on any diet is to eat healthier and to eat more whole foods. Absolutely. And you can fuck that up and do a bad version of any diet. You can do paleo and have it be almond flour everything, bacon wrapped around every single spear of asparagus that you ever put in your mouth, giant honkin' steaks. Like you could do that version of paleo and you could call it paleo. Or you could do a more plant-heavy, diverse, whole food version of paleo, and you're going to get two different results. And similarly, just so I'm not picking on only paleo, you could do a pretty healthy version of a vegan diet where you're doing a lot more fruits and vegetables and legumes, and you're being mindful of your protein, and you're taking a B12 supplement, and maybe you're taking a zinc supplement to skirt around any potential deficiencies, and you're being mindful to eat, like beans and rice together so you get the complementary proteins. Like you could do all of that shit that we're taught in Nutrition 101, or you could do a version of vegan that I've seen before where you're eating canned Duncan Hines frosting because it's vegan.
Yes, it
and
is.
dip it with Teddy Grahams because those are vegan. You could eat Oreos. You could eat.
Sounds like you've done this before, Nikki.
Yeah, well,
Nikki used
no,
to be
you know what it is. So Dave reawakened something in me. When you brought up a documentary on Netflix back in the day, my brain automatically went to, it was either Forks Over Knives or there was another one around.
The one with the athletes, the MMA guy, I think did it now.
No, there's another one around the same time, and it's where they took 3 normal people and they taught them how to be vegan, and they did like a walkthrough of the grocery store with this health coach lady. Anyway, she actually went through and she was showing them, yeah, and you could eat this because this is vegan. And she was literally showing them like, oh, you could eat Teddy Grahams and Duncan Hines frosting still, because both of those are vegan. So they get a free pass. Those are healthy.
Yeah, those are
and I
cool.
remember pulling my hair out and thinking, of all the things you could teach these people, I mean, like, I get that you want them to have some treats and you don't want them to feel totally isolated and deprived, and that there's some value in this. But like, the one girl was eating the Teddy Grahams and frosting every damn day of her life, I think, after that, because she was so thrilled that it now gets a free pass and that's a health food for her. But anyway, my rambling point. I think that there's probably a more healthy and a less healthy version of almost any diet, probably not carnivore, but
yeah,
like how much flexibility is there? But like, that's where I think a lot of people mess up. They do, keto, but then they over rely on the stupid fat bombs and they're not eating vegetables, or they do, paleo, but they're wrapping everything they eat in a slice of bacon 24 hours a day. And it's like, you don't get it. Like, you're missing the whole point of doing the diet. You're missing the whole point of trying to change your nutrition if you just take these stupid shortcuts and do this bullshit. Like, of course you're not going to get the results that you're hoping for. It's not rocket science. It's sad because it does. Really. Real change takes effort, and it sucks because none of us want to put in that kind of effort, but it's not rocket science when you get down to it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, carnivore is kind of a good, good example. I can see the utility in doing a short-term carnivore diet if you feel like you're having all these food intolerances, or issues with your eating, your gas, bloating, all that stuff. Just to find, short-term, start that, and then start adding things back in. But that's not what happens because people identify with a diet. They're carnivore MD. They're, and the problem with that is then all of a sudden, all of the potential issues you may be having, they're not a problem with the diet. For example, your LDL cholesterol or ApoB, it doesn't matter if you're on carnivore. It's a completely separate metabolic state. It's like, you got to prove that. You can't just say that that's the thing. And kind of like one of the things I've seen a lot with, and as someone who suffers from this condition, it's just glaringly obvious what's happening with these people, with a lot of these people who think they're oxalate dumping when they go carnivore. They're experiencing gout. I'm almost certain of it. When you look at the data, when you look at the mechanisms behind how gout happens, it's you increase uric acid. Meat-heavy diets are generally going to have more uric acid or more purines, which are going to create more. You're going to make more uric acid. But then you have so much sulfur-based amino acids in your diet. You're peeing out all this sulfur, which acidifies your urine, which just causes the uric acid to continually circulate throughout your body. And it's when I first had, I can't even remember when I had my first gout attack. And it turns out that definitely wasn't my first one. I felt it in my toe, and my brother had just said, well, he gets gout. My sister gets gout, which is kind of rare. She's younger than me. My dad always got gout. And I'm like, holy crap, I got gout. And I just started reading it. And it's like, gout isn't what most people think it is. They think of the acute gout attack where their foot starts to hurt or their knee starts to hurt, but it's way more involved in that. And turns out we're laying down these crystals into our joints everywhere in our body. It's just more likely to happen in your hands and your feet because there's a lower body temperature in those areas. I don't know if you guys, I'm older, so I kind of remember when I was a kid in science class, we made the rock candy. And what you do is you heat up a solution of sugar water, and then you kind of set it on a windowsill, and you kind of put this string in there, and it starts crystallizing these rocks. That's basically what's happening. So when you have lower temperature, it's more likely to crystallize. There's these various supersaturation of uric acid more likely to crystallize. And it's just clear based off of the evidence, gout is a chronic condition. When your gout flare stops, that doesn't mean the crystals are gone. It just means they're stabilized in whatever joint they are. And the problem is we see this with people who take allopurinol to lower their uric acid. They start getting gout attacks. And that's because, kind of going along with the rock candy analogy, when you decrease the amount of uric acid in your fluids, then you start kind of peeling this off of the uric acid deposits in your joints, and then you get these crystals forming in the joints as you're losing them. So gout is something, it's just like you're accumulating all this stuff, you'll start to get more attacks, and then eventually you got to find a way to kind of lower your uric acid long enough so that they all dissolve. I think that's what most of the oxalates based have. It's just there's not really good evidence that it happens in a normal person. If you have primary or secondary hyperoxaluria, yes, but look at you. You didn't seem to have symptoms of oxalate stones, even though your levels were the highest you've ever seen. So
Yeah.
I just think it goes to show you that sometimes there's a better answer. Generally speaking, the thing with the better level of evidence is probably what you should go with. And if that whole story is built on in vitro cell studies and things that happen to animals when you completely restrict them of calcium so that they absorb all the oxalate they consume, it's not a good. There's a lower probability that that's likely to be correct.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think the thing that's so hard, and it happens in the IBS space with FODMAP, it happens in paleo, it happens in carnivore, vegan, whatever it is. I think it's like the demonization of all the foods then leads to malnutrition. And, so many people that we work with have totally lost sight of the idea that they need to be nourished. And it's like, that should be the core of any diet that you're on, that you're getting the nutrition that you need for your gut brain to function optimally. And that just gets so lost. And it's really unfortunate just because, a lot of people that I work with have dug themselves into much deeper of a hole trying to avoid all these dangerous foods, these dangerous FODMAPs, or, these dangerous carbs or whatever it is that they've, led themselves to a place that's actually pretty hard to get out of. And that's really the bummer with a lot of these diets, because the fear is so strong in them to be able to divert, even if they're not feeling well. They kind of like override their own, thoughts and beliefs around it too, of like, this isn't helping me. It's more foods that I need to it's more foods I need to remove, instead of like, no, this diet just isn't working. I need to shift. And I think it's really important to treat diet change to some degree like an experiment too. Like there you need a certain amount of nutrition, but there's going to be some level of experimentation too, of like, I might do better with a little bit more protein or a little bit more carbs compared to the average person. I think there's general rules of thumb. Or again, maybe there's a few foods that you don't do well with. But it shouldn't be like all these foods, like huge category of food that make it a lot harder for you to nourish yourself. If that's the case, you probably need to maybe reassess how you're viewing the nutritional side.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I wanted to, I know you had mentioned something. I was going to say, I know you had mentioned like how microbes in the environment are being fueled by what you're eating. So like, if you eat gluten, there's gluten degrading microbes. If you eat oxalate, there's oxalate degrading microbes, and how, a lot of things are shifting now in the microbiome space. I don't really see it as much in the functional space, but I do see a lot of, more microbiome forward people talking about this. And it aligns with the work you've done on Hack Your Gut. And it's just that, the microbiome is very much dictated by the environment. So it's what you're feeding it, your circadian rhythm, your nervous system, like all these things create an environment that then facilitates the growth of certain microbes. And I think when people really zoom too heavily in on the microbiome, they get into a lot of trouble, because they think, I can just go in, like we were saying earlier, bomb the gut and like, strong arm it to be what I want it to be. Yeah, it's like I need to strong arm this gut to be what I want it to be, and then all my symptoms will be gone. And I think that is just such a shame, that it's still very much microbiome forward, instead of like, what habits or things could you change to create a much better environment for the microbiome to thrive in? And I think that conversation doesn't happen as often as it should. And I think you oftentimes are presenting a lot of ideas that support the environmental kind of look at the microbiome. So how to shift the environment. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I know circadian rhythm, you're super awesome with content on that. So we could talk about that. And then just in general, your ideas of that sort of philosophy of being much more kind of centered on focusing on the environment versus just strictly on like manipulating the microbiome.
Absolutely. So clearly diet matters. Of course, fiber, polyphenols, the amount of The fat you consume is going to affect, bile acids that are going to reach your colon. Probably mentioned that. You have a stomach or mouth, stomach, small intestine, and then there's the colon. The colon is where the vast majority of the microbiome kind of lives. And so clearly what you eat, especially things that you can't break down like some polyphenols and fiber, are important because they make it all the way down there. I also believe sodium is a big thing. You don't want a lot of sodium to get down there. But as far as like your food, like, you're eating fruits and vegetables, there was just a recent study that showed with the fruits and vegetables, it's like a lot of the microbes that are found on the fruits and vegetables, guess where they end up? They end up down in the colon. So it's like, it's important, that you don't overwash your food, that you eat a diversity of food. Clearly, everybody kind of understands the food component. Fermented foods, of course, as well. But what about other factors? And I kind of got hooked into circadian rhythms. I remember actually specifically, we were in the hospital when we had my first son, and I kind of got into circadian rhythms a little bit at that point. But the hospital that we were at, my son was born late, so he was big, and he was in the NICU. And I'd go in there, and they kept the lights completely black. I guess that wasn't really a thing. They used to be on all the time, and I kind of, I'm like, you know what? Like, it's interesting that they're kind of following these kind of circadian principles. Of course, light kind of tethers your clock to the day-night cycle, so exposing yourself to light, particularly sunlight, specifically during the day, getting enough of that so that when you kind of night winds down and you're in your house, that the light levels are lower, tells your body like, oh, this is daytime, this is nighttime. But it's not just about that. It's physical activity. Core body temperature is a really important circadian rhythm, what's called a Zeitgeber, time giver. That's because you're physically active during the day. It raises your body temperature, and that signal actually kind of, you have your master clock, which is in your brain, a place called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, but you have peripheral clocks everywhere, your skin, your eyes, your muscles. And so body temperature, increasing your body temperature gets make sure all of those clocks are on the same time. There needs to be a signal that every cell can respond to. They all have heat shock proteins. So it kind of helps synchronize all these clocks to know, hey, this is the daytime and this is the nighttime. And then, of course, when you eat is important as well. And that's generally your eating window. I think people get bogged down in the minutia of this stuff. Oh, well, what if I have breakfast at 7 o'clock today, but I have it at 7:30 tomorrow? Just pick a feeding window. Try to generally eat around the same time. Mine is between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. I don't always follow that. On the weekends, I might kind of let it go. Actually, I almost always do let it go. But it's just following those same patterns over and over again. Your clocks are going to set themselves to your behavior. So be physically active during the day. Make sure you get sunlight during the day to your eye. Make sure you're eating within the same window. And then there are other things you can do, specific things you can eat. But when we look at the microbiome, it's absolutely interesting what happens to the microbiome. And I don't know if you guys were around for the U-biome. I know you were probably around for the tail end of it when they got tossed off, but I remember buying those tests and checking it. And then there was a lot of discussion in the literature about, hey, it depends when you have this test taken. If you have it taken during the day or early in the morning versus whether you're doing it at night. So when you kind of look at that, what your microbes are doing, you have this giant set of microbes, but they oscillate in terms of maybe this batch proliferates during the day and becomes much more plentiful, but these guys are kind of chilling. And then at night, it switches. And a lot of that's kind of dictated by the feeding fasting cycle. So one of the easiest things to think about is providing you're eating enough fiber. When that fiber hits your gut, your colon specifically, microbes are going to break that down into short chain fatty acids, and it's going to provide substrates that are going to help set your circadian rhythms. And then when you're not consuming food, some of the microbes that are hanging out in there might turn their attention to your mucus layer, start degrading that, and release a completely separate set. I wouldn't. So the data kind of indicates that there is this circadian rhythm of the different short chain fatty acids, which are converted from fiber by microbes in your gut, to where propionate might be something that becomes more prevalent when your microbes have been snacking on your mucus layer. And it's interesting because propionate is actually a your body takes a precursor to glucose. Your liver takes the short chain fatty acid propionate and converts it into sugar for gluconeogenesis so that you can maintain blood sugar levels, potentially while you're fasting. I mean, you're really going to be hard pressed finding RCTs that are going to be able to tease all this stuff out. So I wouldn't say it's at that level. Just very interesting. And we do see variations in these throughout the day. So, and they don't just have butyrate, for example, is the primary nutrient source for the cells in your colon, your colonocytes, but it's also an epigenetic modifier. It's an HDAC inhibitor, which is a histone deacetylase inhibitor, which changes the way your genes are regulated. It does a lot of stuff, not just kind of feed those cells in your gut. But going back to your mention of the environment of the gut, one thing when your colonocytes take up that butyrate, they metabolize it in the mitochondria, and that just sucks the oxygen out. It's more or less preventing it from getting from your blood into your colon, because your colonocytes are taking the oxygen that's in your blood and using it to metabolize butyrate. And there's this really interesting new study looking at, so a lot of people get bogged down with the very specific microbes, and I do think there are some really interesting microbes. For example, Faecalibacterium presnitzi, which is really interesting. Find it in most people, but I think people get too bogged down in, do I have Akkermansia? Do I have lactobacillus? And a stool test doesn't necessarily show you what's sitting there in the mucus layer, but what's really interesting is that this kind of new perspective is, rather than looking at the specific characters, it's looking at the ecological niche, like what's going on there. And this paper, which I can send you the link to, I've mentioned it on Substack, and why I think it's important, is rather than looking at the very specific microbes, it's looking at what they do. And so you have these microbes, which, generally speaking, this kind of group of microbes that are really key to human health. And they're called obligate anaerobes, meaning if you put oxygen in there, they die. You want those guys there. And of course, you have aerobic organisms, which kind of do well in aerobic environments where there's a lot of oxygen. But you have these middle ground guys called the facultative anaerobes, which, if there is no oxygen, they don't need it. But if it is there, they can use it. And these guys can become problematic because, not necessarily because they're there, but they're taking the niche of these what are called primary fermenters. And now you don't have space for these primary fermenters. And the question is, was it because you ate too much XYZ that caused them to proliferate? Or, for example, did you have a lot of inflammation? Are you not consuming enough butyrate so that oxygen is able to cross over into the colon? And if these kind of features are interesting, and you don't think about it. There's a really interesting book called The Hidden Half of Nature, which discusses about, basically, it makes the analogy of a garden from the perspective of someone going through cancer treatment. And they're talking about microbes, and it's like, you need to think of your gut. You can't think of your gut, as long as I take the seeds, which would be probiotics, and toss them in there, they're just going to grow. No, if you take, say, tomato seeds and throw them in a sandbox, they're not going to do anything. The conditions aren't right. There's a soil microbiome. There's no soil there. There's no fertilizer. There's no food for them. There's not a lot of water there. They're probably not getting enough sun exposure. You need to look at all of these things, and that is kind of where I kind of came into on gut health. Is like, what are all of these factors that healthy microbes need? I don't need to toss them down in there. I need to make the conditions right for them to proliferate. And, I did have, I suspect from the kind of the paleo situation with me, like, I did have some gut issues. I can't even remember when they resolved. It was such a long time ago. And I think it was just that. I took out dairy. I took out, I took out gluten. I took out, there's certain vegetables I wasn't eating. I eat a lot of potatoes now. I love potatoes. Potatoes are a great source of potassium, great source of magnesium. And, carbohydrates are great for you, provided, you're not scarfing them down in this, in the form of like Twinkies and ding dongs. But just looking at this, like, as long as I eat a pretty good diet, what lifestyle factors do I need to promote this environment? Good sleep, stress management. As I mentioned before, I do think the sodium-potassium ratio is really important. I don't think people eat anywhere near enough potassium, and I think they eat way too much sodium. And I say that as a saltaholic, a reformed saltaholic, I should say. I was able to get out of there. So yeah, there's so much physical activity. Mentioned you don't want a lot of oxygen in the colon. When you exercise or when you're physically active, even just going for a walk, your body shunts blood away from your gut and to your muscles. And your liver's getting some because it's regulating blood glucose levels and all that stuff, but it's kind of pulling it all away from the gut, and less blood flow means there's less oxygen to kind of traverse from the blood into the colon. So it's a lot more than taking probiotics, prebiotics, and maybe chugging antimicrobials, as you say, to kind of get rid of the bad guys.
Yeah. Well, and I like the analogy of the garden and just like chucking seeds in it and expecting something to grow. And you're right. And I think Amy and I have talked about this in another way too. Sometimes she will get people who reach out to her to pick her brain on FMT, right? And you try to have the come to Jesus moment with them of like, hey, but if you do FMT, you need to be eating enough fiber, you need to eat a diverse diet. And a lot of these clinics are going to advise you on that before you even get the first transplant. And you cannot go, I imagine, you can't go to one of these FMT clinics and just get like the miracle poop infusion if you're coming in eating a carnivore diet. Like they know damn well that there's no point putting the bugs in you because they're just going to immediately die. It's Absolutely. Like if you tried to plant, I'm trying to think of like what a delicate plant would be. I don't know. I'm being a bad gardener right now. Like a tomato plant, right? Like, oh, let's plant a tomato plant, but we're going to plant it in the hottest part of Arizona imaginable. And we're not going to bend the soil at all. We're not going to do anything to the soil. And we're just going to let it bake in the sun and shrivel up and die immediately. Why would you do that? And I feel like a lot of people are taking probiotics prematurely in the hopes that that's going to cure all of their ailments, but they're still eating a non-diverse, non-fiber rich, restrictive diet. And it's like, ooh, is that really going to work? I don't know. Or whatever benefit you do get is going to be very transient.
Yeah. There's interesting. And this was a question I used to get asked a lot. So it's kind of piqued my interest when I saw that there was actually a study on it. A lot of people ask about colonoscopy and the prep and wiping out, and all that stuff. There's just I don't even know when it was very recently published. And they found that basically within 5 days, everything was back to normal. And the primary factor that they found that dictated that was fiber intake. And it makes sense. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the Fee-Fi-Fo study where fermented foods, fiber. They basically compared fermented foods, high fiber foods to kind of see like how people responded. They found that people who did not have a diverse microbiome, if you fed them fiber, it actually increased their inflammation. If they did have a diverse microbiome, it lowered their inflammation. And if you fed them fermented food, it actually increased the diversity of their microbiome. So it's like you have all these kind of levers to pull. And I do think we as a society, it's just like we're looking for the shortcut. But like FMT is a great example. It's not going to do it. You're going to have to do the hard work anyway. So just do the hard work. If you're so far gone that you might need that to goose you along, that's fine. But you have to start doing the work now. A great analogy to that is I know people who've done this gastric surgery and stuff like that. They make you lose like 20 or 30 pounds before you do that. It's like if you can lose 20 or 30 pounds, like kind of go that way because one of the individuals I know who did it, like her life did not end up very good. Like she had multiple nutrition deficiencies. I think she might have got confused when she was talking to the doctor because there were medicines she was taking that she could no longer take. And those were pain medicines. So she had to kind of manage her pain. But it's like, there's just not really a shortcut when it comes to gut health. I mean, the Arizona allergy is a great one, but what we can do in Arizona, we can put up a greenhouse and make the conditions perfect. But you can't. You're not. We
could water the damn plants. You could put a bag of real soil in the desert sand.
You can't do that.
But the point is, you have to go through that effort. You can't just plop the tomato plant in the middle of the desert and expect it to be okay.
Yeah. Well, and I think too that the problem is that promise is so strong that you can just take this protocol and get better. Like the promise and all the noise is so strong that when we talk to people, Nikki and I, when we talk to people, I know we've had similar conversations to this of like, they'll say, I'm doing everything. And it's like, well, we just went through like, okay, your diet's really limited. We need to add more stuff in. Like you told me you're sleeping 6 hours and that's good for you. And I'm like, oh, that's not everything. We probably need to sleep more.
That's
and then
insane.
it's like, oh, like they're calling me in the car because they don't have time to like meet because their job's so stressful. So it's just interesting to me that sometimes because that promise and the noise is so loud that, you know, this protocol is going to fix you, that people sometimes have a really hard time thinking that they've done everything and that they're like this helpless case. Like they kind of get in their own heads in that way, how we were talking about earlier, how it's so important to believe that you can get better, but they'll almost get in their own head of like, oh, I've tried 4 protocols and nothing worked. So I might just be too far gone and I'm trying everything. And it's like, but when we actually like sit down and look at what you're doing, there's so many different levers you can pull on. And not to say you have to be perfect with every lever.
Not done everything.
Right. You haven't done everything. That is false. Point.
Yeah, that's a sad thing is it's just like those people, like I've got a lot of people like this, like I did such and such programming, it didn't work. They blame themselves because the person they're talking to says it works for everybody, but it doesn't work for everybody because this didn't work for this person. And there's one in particular, I'm not going to mention any names, but she's just like, she just ghosted me. I'm like, yeah, guess how many people she probably ghosted before? And she doesn't tell, like if you're in a group, the group, especially with the carnivore, oh, you're not carnivore enough, you're not paleo enough, you're not low carb enough. It's just like, it's insane.
You know what it reminds me of, honestly? Like, I think we're all into our adult lives. So we've gotten through our 20s unscathed.
Yes.
And I feel like if you lived through that decade of your life, you probably were roped into or nearly roped into minimum one multi-level marketing company in your 20s, right?
Cutco Knives or something.
Huh?
The one that I remember is Cutco Knives. They would try to like get me to actually be a seller.
Oh, yeah.
It was weird. Like all their sellers were students, which is odd. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they hook you with it. They're good knife, great knife. Okay, we'll sell it and we'll give you a commission. And as you're aware, like so many podcasts, it's all like, how many times are you going to hear AG1 fixes gut health? It doesn't do anything. The only studies ever shown it increases acetate, which you could do just by eating carbohydrates. I mean, it's insane.
Well, and so my point is, as somebody who has dispensed herbs and supplements and probiotics in my work for many years, and as somebody who had a brick and mortar office where I stocked some supplements, I was like, I think I was always a primo target for these people because they're like, ooh, if we can get her hooked in, she's going to peddle a lot of Beachbody shakes or Herbalife or Mary Kay or whatever it might be, right? And so I swear to God, I think that I have been targeted by MLM people more than anybody else I've ever met. And maybe part of it too is like, I'm too nice and I have a hard time saying no.
You can't say no,
So I let them give me the shtick and they're probably so excited to tell me about the thing. Yeah. But anyway, my point is, if you go to these meetings that they rope you into going to, and you go to like the presentations or the cult meetings, they will say, if you just do the work, it will work for you. Oh, 100% of the time. If you do the work, it'll work for you. You just follow our whatever, and you listen to your upline person, and you reach out to 5 people a day, every single day for 25 days, and you're going to have that pink Mary Kay car in no time, and it's going to be amazing. And the thing that they don't say is, that's the claim that they make in every single one of these meetings. And every single MLM company I've ever seen makes the exact same claim that if you do the work and you follow our shit, it's going to work for you, guaranteed. But the thing is, when you look at the stats for the industry, what is it like? Something like 1 or 2% of people make any money in multi-level marketing. Like 99% of people who join MLMs lose money. And maybe 1 or 2% of people actually make money. And the people who do make money don't make a lot. They make like maybe $300 here or there. And it's not like the pink Mary Kay car that you're dreaming of. So anyway, my point is, I think you're right. It reminds me of that because, again, it's like, this is the one protocol you need. You just need to buy this summit recording with the secret protocol, or this book with the secret protocol, or watch, go to my website where I'm selling my branded supplements that you can buy from me only. And it's all of these promises. And it's like, if you do the diet right, and if you take the pills good enough, if you're strict enough, then this will cure your SIBO. And it's like, they're not telling you the real stats behind the scenes. They're making these claims and there's no repercussions. Like, they get away with saying this. But if you actually peel back the marketing bullshit in that business, how often does that antimicrobial protocol actually work? How often does that practitioner really get people to a point where they feel really good and they cured their SIBO? It's probably not nearly as stellar as you think it is. It's probably just a load of baloney.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Amy's analogy with the experiment is apt. It's like everybody's doing an equals one experiment. And you might try something. You might try low FODMAP, or you might try somebody's quote unquote program. Some aspects of it might work for you. Some aspects of it might not work for you. But you're trying it, and then you take the things that work, and then you toss out the things that don't work, and then you move forward. But people aren't doing that. They almost get like a paralysis by analysis. And it's just because you're mentioning, if you do that, you do that. They're putting the onus on the person so that when they fail, they blame themselves. And that's why it always comes back to, you're not keto enough, you're not vegan enough.
And I will say, to poke a hole at something, because I think that can be a problem. I will say, though, as somebody who's coached a lot of people over the years and somebody who has a program now, I will say my program is excellent and it will help you get results and have you get the aha moments. But if you don't do the fucking work,
you do have to. It's
not going to work.
Absolutely.
You know, like there is some truth to this.
There's
like
always,
if you join a multi-level marketing company and then you never pitch the essential oils to any of your friends ever, you're not going to make money. And that is totally on you. So there is some
there's individual agency in anything like that. And that's not to say it's your fault, but you have to take charge. Like, you have to decide, well, this is not right for me. And that's what I mean. Like, this is not right. I don't have IBS. I got IBS. I need to solve this problem. So I need to try this. You have to give it a fair shot. That's the great thing about, like, data, scientific evidence, research study. There's so much control. And if you cannot control those things, like, say you want to do a low FODMAP diet, but you're just not going to stick to the diet, it's not going to benefit you. Question is, do you continue on with that? Knowing one of the reasons I left paleo was I like craft beer. I love craft beer. Alcohol, gluten, like, you're not really supposed to do it. And it's like, am I really going to kind of stick with this diet that just doesn't necessarily fit for me? I'm sure there are many people, I'm absolutely sure there are many people vegan who it's right for them. It's not right for me. I can't see myself going vegan. I understand why people do. I understand that many people who do see tremendous health benefits. I also see, some people might do the, kind of eat the wrong type of vegan diet where they are pounding these things, where they could potentially give themselves a kidney stone because they're just housing oxalate. All three of those things can exist. At the end of the day, you need to figure out what works for you. And that's not just, well, if I follow this, will it work? It's, will I follow this? Which is I actually just bought a book on foam rolling, which I know a lot about. I've done it for forever. I'm doing, I did the whole thing. I'm like, okay, well, I like this part. I like this part. I'm not really going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to buy this extra stuff that I don't need. Yeah. Can I really blame the program for it not working? No, but I didn't buy the program to just do what that person laid out for me. I did the program so that I could learn new tricks and tips to make my program better for myself.
Well, and I think that brings up two things. And that is it goes back to, like, sort of the theme of this episode as it's panning out is, like, collecting good information and, like, experimenting and like figuring things out on your own. Even, every seminar or conference I've ever gone to, there's smart people on the stage, right? Like, there are doctors and PhDs and nutritionists and whatever up on the stage lecturing, and they're brilliant, but I almost never take away 100% of that lecture. Like, there's going to be some little thing that I disagree with. And honestly, I've joked about this with Amy, that in the gut health space specifically, there are very few people that I find myself agreeing with the vast majority of the time. And really, Amy's the only one. Amy's the person I asked to be my pod partner because I dug her stuff and I thought that she had a good head screwed on her shoulders. But looking in the SIBO world and looking in, like, the gut healing world, I've got some pretty big gripes with what literally everybody else is doing. And, I think there's only so many people on planet Earth that you're going to agree with 100% or close to 100% of the time. And similarly, like, whatever product or seminar or book or whatever you purchase, you're not going to agree with that, or it's not going to fit your needs 100% of the time. So you have to have, like, the critical thinking skills, I guess.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah.
Fishing out and fishing, like, what is good for you and what is not good for you. But again, I find the more you're stuck in rigid, dogmatic thinking styles, the less you're going to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
Right? Like,
yeah.
if you're to draw a parallel, if you're super, super, super embedded and frankly brainwashed by one particular religion, and that you get exposed in, TV or a movie or a book, if you get exposed to another religion, you're not going to be able to look at that critically and really think, oh, what are the things from this religion that make sense to me? What do I like? What do I not like? What could I maybe bring into my life a little bit in some way? You're just going to write it off because it's not part of your religion.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I feel like that's
Yep.
what happens in the health sector a lot.
It does. And it's a lot. It kind of goes to like, you've seen the tricks that they use. They lied to you. The guidelines made you fat or whatever. It's always an emotional plea. It's not a rational plea. I bring it back to, I can disagree with somebody. They can believe the opposite. I don't necessarily care what somebody thinks. I want to know why they think that. And then I can tease apart, is this a rational actor? Or is this a charlatan? Is this somebody who maybe can't see the forest for the trees? Or am I that person? Am I not necessarily separating the emotion from the rational decision making? I 100% agree. Most of the time, you're never going to agree with somebody 100%, but as long as you can tell, like, hey, this person is acting in good faith. If you give them an alternative, like, they believe this because there's a Petri dish study. Well, I believe this because they've tested it in thousands of human beings, and that's what it shows. Now, does that mean they tested it in thousands of human beings and it shows this? That's just showing you kind of what the group on average did. That doesn't mean it's the best thing for you. You try that, and maybe calories are a great thing. You've probably heard, people lose weight by, energy balance by restricting the number of calories they consume and increasing what they expend. But like, a calorie to me is not necessarily a calorie to you. A calorie is a calorie, but the way my body deals with it is different than yours. So if it says, a 2,000 calorie a day diet is good for me, it might not be good for me. On average, for most people, that might be, weight maintenance. That's a starting point. That's not like, oh, I figured it out. Nothing ever works that way. Most people are just not the average of something. They're somewhere on the outskirts of that.
Yeah. Well, think about a bell curve analysis, right? Like, you've got a bulk of people right around that mean, that middle number, but then you do have the outliers who are going to be a bit different. And again, you need to have the awareness and the critical thinking skills to explore that a little bit. And, you start with the thing that seemed to work for most people, and then be open-minded to deviating a little bit to the right or the left and kind of playing with things until you find what works for you as an individual.
Yeah, can't be too rigid.
Yeah, one thing that came up on my Instagram too recently that seems really relevant to this conversation is, I forget who it was. It was some functional provider who was trying to be a business coach to other functional providers. And the whole shtick was, let me show you how to use testing to sell your stuff. And it's like, oh, this seems so like just unethical in a way to be like, oh, maybe not unethical is the wrong way, but just like, oh, I'm going to use that I have this one test that's going to be able to solve all your problems and create certainty.
You can't order a GI map. You need me.
Right. Yeah. It's like this certainty situation. It's like any provider can order a test for you. Whether that test is going to be validated or helpful is a different story. But the whole advertisement just left a sour taste in my mouth because it's like, ooh, this feels so a little bit predatory to a group of people that already has probably a higher degree of doubt and a higher need for certainty. I think there's a lot of anxiety in the IBS space. And so like, you have a group of people that are desperate, filled with doubt, that think that they need all this testing. And that's how you're selling your services, that like, oh, you got to test, don't guess, and creating all this sort of uncertainty.
Yeah.
It's just a bummer because
that's
really
common in functional medicine.
Very
naturopathic
common.
medicine, unfortunately. Like, that's a big selling point. And that's, even if you're not selling the test itself and the ability to do the testing itself, a lot of practitioners also sort of view the testing as like, oh, well, I'm going to use the test results to justify why you need to buy $500 worth of supplements.
It's a selling point.
Yeah. Sure. So it's also, it's like, It's a tool that they use to market themselves and their clinic and their services and get you in the door with this illusion of certainty. But also, they're going to turn around and justify why you need $500, $600, $700 of supplements a month to fix all your shit.
Yeah, for sure. Like your example is great, Nikki, where you said, testing can be useful. You can use a note test. It can be useful. You saw your oxalic acid very high, but you weren't getting symptoms. So why would you treat that? Like, you got to look at the whole clinical picture. The test can be useful, but when you kind of, as you're saying, use this is the test you need, it's predatory. Whatever the test shows, the person's going to believe. So what happens if the test doesn't show they have a problem that they might actually have? It's very, like, I 100% agree. Part of the problem with IBS is it's a syndrome and not an actual specific disease. Specific disease, we know the cause and we can treat. You've got strep throat, so you need an antibiotic to get rid of that. But since it's a syndrome, there's a whole bunch of potential different causes within there. So everybody's treatment plan is not going to be the same. And it's very hard to sell something that isn't cookie cutter because it's very complex. And I don't know if it's cognitive bias or whatever it is. It just, people are very uncomfortable with it.
Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah, it's a tricky place for sure. I'm going to make a suggestion, though, to pivot the conversation a little bit here. Before we got officially rolling with the recording, there was one other topic that you threw out there that you wanted to talk about. And yeah. So would you mind giving us a little bit of a crash course on fascia?
Prop.
I'll give you, I do have a prop. This is what I wash my sneakers in, or dry my sneakers in rather, so they're not sounding like elephants running down the road. So a lot of people aren't aware of this, but you have something, if you eat meat, you've seen it, you have something kind of going throughout your body called fascia. If you eat steak, you eat chicken. For example, if you're peeling the skin off the chicken, you see this. It's kind of very fibrous stuff. If you have steak, it's what's often called as the grizzle. So you have this going throughout all your body. So people kind of think, muscles are just this big sacks of meat, but you have this fascia very similar to this kind of going through it. You also have it around your internal organs, the visceral fascia. So in your muscles, it's doing a bunch of things. It's kind of holding them together. It's also making sure that when a muscle contracts, it's pulling. It's continuous with the tendons. So it's helping the muscles pull within the muscles as well. It allows them to glide over one another. With the visceral fascia, that's more kind of holding your organs together. It is providing support as well. And it also allows those to kind of glide across one another. But when we look at it, you can kind of see with my little shoe illustration here, you have these tiny little holes. It's not exactly perfect like this, but throughout the fascia, you have blood vessels and nerves running through it. And what can happen is these nerves and blood vessels can get entrapped in the fascia. So you probably had an injury, whether you pulled a muscle or whatever, and you kind of get it in a sling, and then it's really hard to extend that muscle. And what that is that's the fascia. The fascia loaded with mechanoreceptors. There's more nerves feeding the fascia than there are feeding the skin or the muscle. And what it is doing is it's sensing damage and injury. And it's kind of tightening up the area. You've probably heard of adhesions or scar tissue. That's what the fascia is doing. And so what happens is, this muscle is just doesn't contract as well, and that's because it's being restricted by the fascia after injury, but also when you sit a lot, because when you sit a lot, there's not a lot of tension going through certain parts of your muscles. So what happens is the fascia tightens up. This can cause a lot of problems, and most of it centered around pain. It can also decrease blood flow. There are some theories that this may have an impact, particularly the psoas muscle, which is a hip flexor that's in your abdomen. And there are, if I remember, it's the superior or the inferior mesenteric artery. So it's going into the mesentery, in other words, your gut. And there is some evidence that this might push up against that and kind of restrict blood flow. I'm not really talking to about that because the scientific evidence just really isn't there. But the cool thing about the fascia is while it doesn't respond to stretch, it does respond to pressure, massage, foam rolling a tennis ball on the bottom of your foot, rolling it on your calves or your legs if you get cramps, your abdomen even. And it's a really interesting kind of segue into gut health, because the fascia does seem to play a kind of a role in the gut-brain axis. If you think about it, you have muscles in your abdomen. So if you have a lot of inflammation in your gut, inflammation is something that causes the fascia to become sticky. So I'm going to be talking about this a lot on my Substack. It's one of those things I kind of completely forgot about. As I mentioned, the young lady, I don't even know how long ago that was. It was over 10 years ago. That got better, better for who barely walk from doing this. I completely forgot about it. And I noticed recently, now that I'm doing kind of a sit down job, that I was getting tighter, less flexible and all that stuff. So I'm like, let me get back into doing this. I told people to do it a million times, but I'd never been tight or, kind of had these adhesions or anything like this when I was in my 30s. I told many a 40-year-old to do it. So I started doing it again. It's pretty amazing stuff. I hope to show you guys that on Substack, probably have a YouTube video or two. I did have a program, Circadian retraining program, that way back in the day. I did kind of show some of this foam rolling stuff, but I'm going to kind of cover this a little more. If you get pain throughout your muscles, if you just notice just being poor at movement in general, working on your fascia can be really, really good. A massage therapist is indispensable. However, a foam roller and some tennis balls, and they even make some really cool tools that I'll probably cover on my Substack that can actually help you feel like a million times better. I've seen people go from, just by simply, I should probably mention this with the fascia. You have something called the superficial back line, which basically is a line going from the ball of your foot all the way up your back to the top of your head. And when you get tension anywhere within that, it can actually cause you to not be able to touch your toes. It could cause neck pain. It could cause shoulder pain. And it's really interesting when I'll have people, when they've never done this before, I'll have them do one of two things. I'll have them roll a tennis. If they can't touch their toes, I have them mark where they are. You get somebody from, about 2/3 of the way down their shin, just have them roll a tennis ball on their foot for about a minute, and then they're touching their toes just from doing that. Or alternatively, you can have them just foam roll one whole side of their body and have them lift that leg and then lift the other. I mean, it's pretty amazing. All you're doing is kind of mash this. But to kind of bring this to gut health, it seems that this is very important for autonomic function. There are some studies showing that it can improve parasympathetic tone, which means you're kind of rest and digest. Really hard. I'm not super confident in that study specifically, because the comparator was somebody just sitting in a chair. And when you're foam rolling, if you don't exercise, it's exercise. I just wanted to make sure I made people aware of that. Your fascia just basically connects everything in your body to one another, allows things to kind of glide across one another so they're not restricted. So I think myofascial release, which is the art of kind of working on the fascia, is really important. I think people would feel a lot better and have a lot more energy if they did that. So
Yeah. And you're speaking to my heart in a way, because for all that I'm more known now as the gut microbiome queen and the SIBO person and the gut person, my initial training is as a chiropractor, and I was a personal trainer prior to that. So very, very familiar with fascia. I actually took some of the anatomy trains and some of the visceral.
Tom Myers' stuff. Yeah, that stuff is great.
I took some of the visceral manipulation classes before the lockdown and COVID all happened. And it's really fascinating stuff. I even very recently, I was telling Amy that I developed tennis elbow from just blunt force injury to the outside of the arm. Like a knucklehead, I just whacked my elbow, and I was complaining. I was saying, gosh darn, Amy, you're the one who actually plays tennis. You gave me your damn elbow. What gives? And it's gone on for too long. It's been about 6 months now, and I finally am getting off my butt and trying to treat the damn thing. And I talked with one of my best friends who's a physical therapist, and she pointed out, oh, you could do Graston on it. And I forgot I have knockoff Graston tools from chiropractic school that I bought. So I've been doing that, and I've started doing a little bit of cupping on the elbow, and it's already significantly better just in the span of like 3 days of
it's pretty crazy. It's something you actually feel. It's not like, that's the problem. It's like, I'd love to see more studies, and there are actually a lot of studies. I mentioned like that superficial backline, just rolling a tennis ball on the feet and calves can relieve neck pain, and there's significant evidence for that type of stuff, which is why this kind of how I kind of sell it to people. But I absolutely do think it's probably going to have some effect throughout the body, whether that's through the autonomic nervous system or actually manipulating I don't know how much the visceral fascia responds to that kind of stuff. I did roll my abdomen. I was actually surprised how many adhesions, like really bad. Like I got to get off of this ball for a few minutes there, and that's I should point that out. The whole point of it isn't to induce as much pain as possible until it stops. It's to be very gentle, and you're kind of kneading dough, and you're trying to be very very specific with what you're doing.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's cool stuff though. I look forward to more fascia research coming out because I feel like it was underappreciated up until maybe about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And now again, like anatomy trains and some of the stuff is coming out more and more and more. But I feel like, back in the day when I was going through my degrees, I feel like we didn't talk about the fascia as much. And
well, Tom Myers from Anatomy Train said this is the stuff we used to just throw away. We dissect the body and we throw all this stuff away.
Yeah, you hack all that out so that you could make the muscles look prettier in the dissections.
Yep.
That's all garbage.
Yeah. Wow. It's kind of a corollary to the epigenome. We thought all about the genes, and when they called the epigenome junk DNA, and all of a sudden now it's way more important. It's crazy.
Well, and I hypothesize that the lymphatic system will have its time soon enough too. Because when I was in school, we were taught that there was no lymphatic system in the brain. And then 10 years later, they said, oh, JKLOL, the brain actually has its own lymphatic system and here's it all mapped out. And I think that's going to have some sort of renaissance of its own in the coming years, but maybe we're still a little bit early on the lymphatic thing.
Yeah, it's careful what you believe now, because in 5 years they'll probably disprove a lot of it.
There's some quote, I don't remember who it's attributed to, but there's some quote that says, if you haven't acquired or discarded a major opinion in the last few years, check your pulse, you might be dead.
Yeah, that sounds accurate.
And I agree with that. But all right, Amy, I think, can I pass the torch to you for any sort of closing remarks, final words? We have been talking about having you on the podcast for probably 2 years at this point, Dave. I'm so excited that we finally made this work, and we got all of our schedules together, but it was a pleasure, and we got to talk about some fun topics. Amy, do you have closing remarks? No pressure.
Yeah, no, I think that this has been so fun to actually meet, not in person, but as in person as we can, virtually. And I think to sum up a lot of the conversation, just really trying to think critically about your own journey and being able to experiment, I think is very important. And then make sure to follow Dave as he's putting out some great work on Substack. And are you going to do YouTube as well?
Yeah, I do. So the whole reason I left everything was because I wanted to spend more time with my kids, and kind of, it just was taking way too much time. And then, you have like four social media accounts. But yeah, my plan is to just do Substack, do things that I could cover. Like basically most of the stuff we kind of glazed over here. I'm going to be doing very specific posts. I'm going to bring back a lot of my Hack Your Gut stuff to Substack. That's probably going to be my first move until I can finally start creating more new content. But yeah, I'm absolutely going to be doing the YouTube channel again, focusing on the same kind of stuff I've always had.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Yeah. Well, we look forward to that coming out, and everybody follow Dave on Substack. That's kind of a wrap.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Bye.